G'day, my name's Trent Hall. I'm here as the head of growth for DH Marketing, joined by Pascal.
Hi, everyone. My name is Pascal, and I'm the CTO here at DH Marketing. I specialize in making sure things are doing what they're supposed to do and delivering results for our customers.
Fair enough. So, a bit of a continuation on the last episode that we did when we talked a little bit about planning out your journeys. This time round, whereas one big bit of feedback that we got from our last recording, which was obviously once that it's all set up, how do you test it, right? So, testing can be a bit of an obstacle with any of the flow-based marketing automation tools inside of Salesforce's wheelhouse. But yeah, testing from day one, Pascal, what does that look like to you? I guess first up, why is it mission critical to bake testing into your journey design from the very beginning rather than kind of bolting it on at the end?
Absolutely. You want to make sure from the very beginning that testing is going to be something you have in mind, something that you do, because otherwise your journeys just might not do what you think they're doing. And you have to be really careful around that when you're doing things like offering people discounts or vouchers or trying to send them down one experience. You want to make sure it's the right one. And that it is doing what you think it's doing.
There's a lot of time to talk about it, the journey, not the destination. Well, sometimes we want to make sure we get to the destination right. So,
That's right.
Yeah. So managing the complexity, I guess, every decision split, or I guess, or kind of flow control, or things like that, you find in different flow-based marketing automation pieces inside Salesforce. So every one of those decision splits kind of doubles the testing surface area. So, what practical tactics do you use to keep that journey builder branches or various other things under control?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, look, I have a software development background, and in software development, these are actually really well understood problems with very specific ways in which people approach them. Fortunately, one of the things that we're finding is that marketing cloud software in general just doesn't have some of these tools. So we have to go back to, practice and making sure we're doing the right moves to make things work the way we want them to. Number one thing you can do is keep your journeys simple. It is much simpler to test three simple journeys with 3 or 4 decision splits than it is to test one giant journey that has 12, 14, 24 decision splits. Each of these decision splits, as you said, doubles the testing area. Suddenly it gets really, really hard to manage that. And so the more you can keep it in a box with very well understood inputs and outputs, the easier it is to test.
And I guess journeys often assume like a very neat one-to-one model, yet like us in the wild, a singular customer can have multiple bits of data about them, whether it's multiple orders or subscriptions. So where do teams stumble with one-to-many relationships in their data, and how do you test for that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So very often we find that people make mistakes around having decisions being made involving one-to-many data. So an example of that might be a customer has multiple orders. So let's say you do a journey that looks for people who have not done a transaction in the last 6 months. There's actually 2 separate ways that people build up, and one of them, unfortunately, is wrong. So that's the sort of thing you want to test for. And that is, I don't want to test for somebody with a transaction that's over 6 months old. I actually want to test for anybody that doesn't have a transaction in the last 6 months. The reason for that is that I could have done a transaction 2 years ago and a transaction last week. And if I've done that, I am not somebody who hasn't transacted in 6 months. I am someone who's transacted in the last 6 months. And that is one of the areas where people often really struggle because it sounds like it's the same either way that you do it, but actually it's not. And sometimes it can be hard to see in the software exactly how these things are going to pan out. So understanding that is important, because the next thing around that is making sure you have a test for that. Let's say you're doing a journey for a re-engagement journey, for instance, and you want to treat people differently depending on whether they had previously purchased high amounts or low amounts. You want to be able to have some test cases that cover that so that you can actually account for this and make sure you get the right values.
There's it's funny you mentioned dates. Actually, we've been working with a few customers that have those funny dates, especially when a business spans across multiple geographies. So, do you have a bit of a checklist, like with future dates, past dates, daylight savings, quirks? Is there something that you quickly look at? Because I know that we have to deal with a system date sometimes as well.
That's right. So there's a couple of ways in which I like to test things. First one is making sure that the times work out. Very often the time can be in different time zones. And that's one area you have to be careful with if the times are going to change or if you're going to cross a daylight savings boundary, because you can send your message 1 hour too early or too late. So you want to be careful around that. I much prefer having everything in UTC if you're going to be doing multiple time zones, rather than saying, oh, I'm going to make it all on Sydney time or all on South Australia time, and then having to adjust for the other states. So if you make it all UTC, then you can adjust for that in one hit at the time you create the data.
I know that a couple of tools do the count back and they give you like how many days for each branch and things like that. But the complexity of also some time window based things. So if you have those always on journeys, make sure that you account for if somebody completes the criteria and actually progresses faster than the rest of them. At what point they get to will be well ahead, or maybe even in the time that you don't like. So yeah, that was something that I've learned the hard way on a couple of times.
The other one we've seen people mess up a couple of times, which is quite interesting, is, and that's one that you definitely want to test for. Instead of saying someone who's done an action in the last 30 days, they will say someone who's done an action in the next 30 days. Because in their heads, they're thinking, I want to get somebody when they do that thing, and it's going to happen in the next 30 days. But obviously the system is looking back by the time it's executing that journey. So although you might say this is going to happen in 15 days time, when the journey is running, it will now be in the past. And so you want to make sure you have some testing around that as well.
Yeah, so let's talk about, I guess, the test data that you might be able to use. You have a case for obviously keeping a standard set, or do you advocate, for a standard set of test data or VIPs or certain groups that you keep aside to test these data, or is it just a case of getting variability across your data?
Yeah, so my preferred way when there's a more complex journey is to make sure I have different personas that are going to behave differently through the journey, and try and have 4 or 5 of them that account for some of the use cases that are going to be covered in the journey. The reason I want to have them and have them aside is that, generally speaking, if you're doing a good job of testing your content and so on, which I'm sure we'll talk about some stage in the future, you will need to make changes and retest it. And so what we see people do is they add one new case and then they test just for that. And they don't realize that when they make that change, they broke something else. So having that constant set that you use, that you're always going back over, really makes it easier to do that sort of testing.
Okay, yeah. So I guess that's an ongoing point as well. I guess journeys do evolve. We have the option to create new versions and edit live versions. Is there a difference when you set that new version live? Obviously, we've got one ending and running, and then a new version kind of coming down the pipeline. Talk to us about that.
Look, personally, that's why I like having those. If I know a journey is going to change, and I know this, it's important to make sure it's all correct. Having that set, a data extension in Marketing Cloud or similar in other systems of test data that you just replay every time you make a change to that journey, so you can go, are these people ending up where we're expecting them to end up?
Good stuff. Well,
But how do you do it, Trent?
Yeah, it's funny because we do, obviously, some of the ways that I work mostly day to day with individual customers, it's probably more particular to each of the tools. We obviously have a couple like the upcoming Marketing Cloud on Core, which uses our flow mechanisms, our Marketing Cloud Account Engagement, which has its own kind of testing or kind of faux testing functionality, if you will. And then Marketing Cloud Engagement, which has its own complexities. So each one of them has a little bit of a different tweak, but ultimately, yeah, I'm always a big fan of having a testing group internally, even if you ask some of your employees to be a fake customer and things like that and push them down. You get that real world test, that real world interaction. And some of the reporting populates properly as well. So you get the ability to kind of see it happening in real life. Things like AMP script rendering properly so it's tracked in web analytics tools, or whether or not that it's actually components that are going to alter across in maybe the CRM, so it updates a field there or something like that. I always like having the option to have a real contact going down. It's not just me, maybe a colleague or things like that. So it's always a good way to collaborate with your team as well and get them seeing what it actually looks like when it lands in their inbox, which funnily enough leans into probably, like you said, a further topic about testing the content itself. But yeah, that's been a really insightful way. I guess we obviously see lots and lots of these every day. Your average user gets their tool mostly and their tool only. But if you're interested in understanding how to dive a bit deeper into testing, what the landscape of data in some of these automation tools look like, feel free to reach out to us at info@hhmarketing.com.au. Thank you, Pascal, for your time. It's been awesome.
Awesome. Thanks, Trent.